Says, there we go. Hey, Rhymos. I am Grant Faulkner, Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month. Thank you so much for joining us today for this fantastic webcast called Ask an Editor. We are going to learn everything about editing novels and publishing novels too. You know, in NaNoWriMo, we always say that one big reason to do NaNoWriMo is because you can't edit a blank page. And the good news is that I've got a bunch of words on my pages are no longer blank, and I'm assuming that everyone tuning in no longer has blank pages to deal with either. So we've got something to edit. And strangely enough, right before this started, I was on Twitter and I saw this quote from Nora Roberts, and she says, "I can fix a bad page, I can't fix a blank page." So today is like an exercise in pondering how to fix that perhaps bad page, at least in my case. The challenging thing is that I feel like after NaNoWriMo, it is like walking into a crazy, messy room. Like my novel is just super intimidating. I don't know where to start picking it up and cleaning it up. And so I'm hoping that our wise editors who are with us from Swoon Reads can guide us through that messy room and clean it all up so that we can submit our novels. And I want to say, beyond this webcast also, if you go to the NaNoWriMo site, under the Inspiration tab, click on the Now What page and sign up and take the revision pledge or the revision promise. And that's a great way. You'll see thousands of people who have also taken that promise. And it's just a great way to feel that NaNoWriMo community cheering you on. And we have Now What sections in our forums. And actually, if you take that revision promise today, we have 5 copies of my book, Pep Talks for Writers, that we're giving away. We're raffling off. You have to sign that revision promise today by midnight. And this book is designed, there are 52 essays in it, and it's sort of designed to you know, have that creative mindset to write year round and finish your novel and keep writing it. So I hope that works, and I hope you sign up. And we also have, go on the Now What page, and you'll see a bunch of events that we have planned, tweet chats, other webcasts. We have a bunch of resources that we're posting on our blog regularly. And we also have goal trackers on the site. So if you haven't finished your novel, you can use our goal trackers to set a new goal and hopefully finish it sometime soon. So keep writing, and hopefully you can submit your novel to Swoon Reads, who's been a fantastic sponsor of NaNoWriMo for 5 years now. It's amazing. And Swoon Reads, if you don't know them, they publish great YA fiction with the help of readers and writers like you. And our editors from Swoon will explain a little bit more what that means. And what's nice is they're dedicated to finding undiscovered and great work, which is really nice. I think they're really receptive to new work by debut authors. So visit them at swoonreads.com. And today, just to go over the logistics of the webcast, I'm going to interview Kat and Holly for about a half an hour, but then we're going to take questions from the audience. So please think of the questions you want to ask and put them in the chat window, and our producer, Catherine, will send them to us magically, and we'll get them answered. So yeah, I want to introduce, first of all, Holly West. After growing up in a small town in southern Kentucky, she was known as that girl who reads a lot there. And so
I will still answer to that.
She said she'll still answer to that.
Yeah.
Good. What I like is that you had the dream of moving to the big city and working with books, and that came true. I love when dreams come true like that. And one more thing to know about Holly, I read this on the internet beforehand today. In case of an apocalypse, she was asked what book she would bring with her. And we hope an apocalypse doesn't occur, but she has a copy of Terry Pratchett's Night Watch reserved for that moment of the zombie apocalypse.
It's wrapped in plastic so that I can just have it with me at all times.
Yeah.
Smart.
You
Smart.
have to have a book like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Find a book like that, wrap it in plastic.
And then Kat Brzozowski. Did I say that right, Kat?
You said it right. You win.
Good. I passed the test.
Yes.
Kat is from New Hampshire, not to be confused with Vermont, which means that she's prone to saying wicked a lot. You can count the wickeds if they occur here. Maybe we should have a, I don't know.
Wicked tracker.
Some kind of contest. She still considers herself a tourist in New York City, where her goal is to eat as many dumplings and see as many Broadway musicals as possible.
Yeah.
One crucial thing to know about Kat, she identifies as a Ravenclaw.
I do, but people here have told me that I'm actually a Hufflepuff, so I'm having a really hard time.
Well, there's your identity, and then there's the identity people give you, right?
Yeah, it's really been a struggle. Been a process of self-discovery. Painful.
Yeah, I feel like I'm something different every day, actually.
Yeah, me too. Mostly Ravenclaw.
Well, cool. And your favorite book in high school? Kat's favorite book was Lois Lowry's *The Giver*, which is an amazing book.
Still my favorite book.
Yeah.
It remains. It's
Cool.
the top for me, never to be beaten. Unless something really great comes across Swoon Reads, and then I'll dethrone Lois Lowry in *The Giver*.
Yeah, that's a good goal.
Yeah.
Well, hey, on that note, I am curious. You know, I think we all have ideas of what editors do, but I don't really truly know what you all do all day. And especially a Swoon Reads editor, like when you're getting that help from other writers and readers in your community, what does that all look like?
Yeah, so in terms of what an editor does, I think of it sort of like a project manager. So they're the person that guides the author from the beginning of the process, which is, acquisition, actually purchasing the book for the company, all the way through and past publication. So they're sort of the hub of that wheel that's coordinating with the design to get the cover made, coordinating with the production department to get the book copy read, copy edited, proofread, actually made into a physical book, marketing and publicity to make sure we have a great plan once the book is out there in the world, the sales department, foreign rights, sort of everything, coordinating and being the author's proxy in-house. Mm-hmm. What's great about Swoon Reads is that unlike a traditional publishing model where an agent or an author would submit to an editor and we would acquire it through that, we have this whole bevy of manuscripts on Swoon Reads that we get to pick from. And we have an editorial board in-house made up of people from all different departments to tell us what they love, in addition to the readers on the site. So we're able to choose things that are not only favorites of ours and things that we might be drawn to, but things that people in the design department here or readers, in Japan or New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Kentucky, like readers from all over have said, we love this. So we end up with a really diverse and interesting list of books from, books about Black ace protagonists to books about kidnapped princesses to books about, we have a lot of like enemies to lovers books. We have a whole range of things, and there's stuff that we might not have otherwise discovered. So it's really a collaborative publishing process. It's a lot of fun.
I like to think of my job as sort of like being a professional fangirl. I spend a lot of time on fan sites, and especially with like Swoon Reads, it's like all of these stories and all of this wonderful pop culture gets kind of like presented to me, and I kind of like go through it and let the crowd like help me decide what is cool, what is great, what is amazing, what am I going to fall head over heels in love with. And then once we've got that list down and we know what we're going to be in love with and what I'm going to be obsessing over for the next few years, I work with the author to sort of like make it as perfect and as wonderful as possible, like nitpick over it until everybody is as happy as we can possibly get it and it's bright and shiny, and then I shove it at other people with great enthusiasm and go, here, read this, you have to read this, it's the best thing ever. And this is what I do.
That was so cool.
Generally with that amount of bounce.
I was going to say, like, the traditional publishing process usually kind of I feel like it narrows things into this big gate that an agent and an editor, they hold the keys to. And I like how Swoon Reads like opens that up, like it's a much wider process. And I was curious, when you say you get the help from the community, are you actually reading people's comments on what's been submitted?
I don't say I read all the comments because there are a lot of them, but I will go through as we get any book that that comes to our attention. I first go and look at everybody's comments. That's the first thing I do before I even read the book.
No, we look at comments. We look at how many comments it has, what kind of comments, what sort of feedback is there, which is really great. And to your point also about sort of demystifying the publishing process, one thing we were talking about before, which is great, is if we have this wonderful Swoon Reads blog that everyone should check out. And we have posts almost every day, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, like how does a cover actually get made? Like how does a book end up in Barnes & Noble? You know, what are these sort of publishing terms people use, like behind the scenes, and then talking to authors about, you know, what it's like to get revisions back or what it's like to see their book in a bookstore. So if people have questions about sort of the behind the scenes stuff, our whole point is to pull back that curtain and say, you know, come see what these experiences are like with us. You know, it's really a team effort.
Yeah, you were asking what an editor actually does. We haven't got a lot of stuff about all of the massive amounts of meetings that we go to, but I wrote a whole series of blog posts on Swoon Reads a couple of years ago that lay out every stage that a manuscript goes through, like every single editing stage from us acquiring it to it being a finished book. Yeah, so that information is there.
I've read some of those blog posts, and I have to say they're super helpful and super friendly. And I love, because like I've worked with editors, and it's really strange. Sometimes you don't know what all the steps are, you know, what's next for your book or what's even really happening.
Totally. We're trying to change that. So
yeah. Well, here's a question. I think a lot of authors feel that they've got a really strong concept for their novel, but maybe it's not all coming through as well as it could in the writing itself. So how perfect does a manuscript need to be? Should writers be hiring professional editors before they submit to you, or can you just fall in love with the concept and say, I want to work with this author and make it really good?
I think I mean, I do a lot of falling in love with things and then working with it. But my favorite thing as an editor is to do those kinds of revisions and really work with the author to help pull out stories and things. I really, really like that sort of like big picture structural work. So it kind of depends on what you mean by perfect, right? Like, when you're going to submit something, you should strive to make your novel as strong as possible before you submit. You don't need perfect. I don't ever expect perfect. I'm an editor. It's my job to help you get there. But you want it to be as strong as possible, because if you are going through Swoon Reads, then you're going to have a lot of people reading your book, and you want to give them the best read as possible so that you have a better chance of, you know, everybody being excited and falling in love with your book. Because the most important thing is I have to fall in love with something of your book. It's not enough just to have a cool concept. You also have to have characters that I fall in love with. Or if you have characters that I fall in love with and this really awesome world, but the plot's not quite there, I can help you fix that. But I can't take like one cool thing and help you build the book around it. You have to have you have to show me that you have 2 or 3 cool things, and then you have this one thing that needs help with, and I can help you with that one part.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I would say we want the writers to like take it as far as they possibly can in their own, you know, ability. Like we want to see that they really put the work in, and then we're willing to work with them to make it better if we can fall in love with one element of it.
Yeah, I think you don't want to just take your like NaNoWriMo first draft and submit it to Swoon Reads, because the wonderful things that you've got in there, those wonderful things will probably be buried by all of the stuff that you wrote at midnight after having 7 cups of coffee. And so you want to kind of like read through it again and revise. And I think we have some questions later to talk about ways to do that. But, you know, I think it's just make it the best you can, go through a couple of rounds of revisions, get someone other than you to read it once, give you a little bit of feedback. But you don't need to hire a professional editor to like super edit it, because we don't expect it to be perfect. You know, we need to see that there's a story there that we can love. Yeah.
Cool. I love that. I'm curious on that note. I've heard, at least when authors are submitting to agents, or agents are sometimes working with like editors in different publishing houses, that first page has to just do so much work. It has to really grab people, maybe even the first sentence in the first paragraph. Do you feel that way about the manuscripts you read, or do you give them more of a chance and read a few pages, or read 10 pages?
I think, you know, in Swoon Reads, we ask our readers to give a manuscript 3 chapters and, you know, leave some feedback then. And I would say I try to follow that same rule in my own reading. I don't need the first page to be perfect or the first sentence to be perfect. Again, I think that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself as a writer. But I want there to be something happening. Like, I want there to be some kind of action, and I want the scene to have forward momentum. I think the pages that probably stop me right away are pages where the whole world is sort of told to me instead of shown. So I think if you have that sort of first page where, you know, I'm thinking of how you write when you're a child, when you say, like, my stories would always start like, my name is Kat, I have brown hair and brown eyes, I live in New Hampshire. You know, you feel like as a kid, you're kind of like, I'm going to lay out the whole character and premise now. And although authors are obviously doing something more sophisticated than me when I was 7, there's a tendency, I think, to sort of front load a lot of exposition. So when I get first pages that really immerse me in action and really show me the character through the scene, those are the ones that keep me reading in the first page. But I think first pages and first chapters are really important, but I would say 2 second chapters are really important. You know, like, you don't want to have a wonderful first chapter and then the second chapter sort of drops off. So I would say make sure you just have your character doing something and active.
Yeah, I also get into almost every book through character. So having a character right up front doing something active is there. But, you know, beginnings are hard. So if I open a book and I am looking at it and I'm like reading it and it's not working for me, there's a lot of world building. I have been known to skip randomly to chapter 5 to see if your characters are doing anything. And then if I like the character in this random scene that I have skipped to somewhere in the middle of the book, I'll go back and read to get there and see what's going on. If I don't, then I'll be like, this book is probably not for me, and I will write a very nice rejection letter and send it back.
That's great advice. I think a lot of authors really do struggle with getting into the action sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
and showing versus a lot of exposition and telling. So it's good to know. I'm very curious with this next question, because I think a lot of NaNoWriMo writers have this challenge, as I mentioned in the intro, is that we're looking at a pretty messy, rough draft. As you said, you might have written some of it after drinking 7 cups of coffee at midnight. Not perhaps most people's perfect best writing state. So do you have any advice about where to start with the revision? Like, do you think that people should just start reading at the beginning and working at it like chapter by chapter, or looking at the overall structure and kind of thinking about the story arc and then going into it? I'd love to hear your tips.
So the first thing you do is, after you finish writing, you put it down, you walk away for a while and let your brain rest and get a little bit of distance from the story. Then once you've had a second to sort of recharge and you're ready to start revisions and you're ready to come back to the story with a fresh eye, I'm going to share what I do when I'm editing a book that I read. I pick it up and I read the whole thing, and I make an outline of, as I go, of exactly what happens in each chapter, in each section, along with any thoughts or reactions or questions that I might have. So I don't have to fix the problem right as I'm reading through it the first time, because the answer might be later. I just have to be like, I don't understand this. What's going on here? Or, this is so cool, I love this, don't lose this, right? Any notes like that I might have. And I make the outline of the book, what is actually on the page. So then once that's finished, I have a map that I can play with. I can be like, this is what actually happens. And right here in chapter 4, I had this question. And the answer is actually in chapter 15. So maybe we take that scene from chapter 15 and move it to chapter 4, because it answers that. Right? And then when you have that kind of outline and you have those kind of shorthand notes of where you were confused or where you had thoughts, then it makes it a lot easier to think about moving things around when you have an outline versus when you are looking at pages and pages of text. And I always start with like structure, like the shape of the story, the plot, you know, that kind of thing. And I also look at characters. Every single edit letter I send starts with a section that says, sometimes there's general notes like big things to keep in mind, but then there's always a section that says characters. And I look at every major character and I describe what I understand of their strengths, their weaknesses, specific scenes that illustrate both of those things, how they change and grow over the story, and making sure that they end in a different place than where they started. All of these things are good to look at before you dive into revising, because that way you know what you're looking at. What of the amazing story that you have in your head actually made it onto the page? And then you can look at all of that, and once you have the characters and the structure and the plot laid out, like this is what I've got, you can move things around, you can make this character stronger, you can do more with that one, and you can plot out what you want to do, and then start at the beginning and go through now that you have a map for how to get to the end.
I love this. I feel like I need to know no more.
All right, bye. We're hanging out. No.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think sometimes we have a kind of active conversation in NaNoWriMo about whether you should plan and how much you should plan before you write the novel. And I always feel that it is like really actually perhaps more beneficial to outline it after you have the rough draft, kind of like you're saying. And I love that approach where you've got the outline of the rough draft as it exists, but you're also sort of revising that as you're reading through your rough draft.
You just ask questions as you read. Like any place where you get hung up, a reader is going to get hung up. Or any place where you're like, I could do this better. Don't stop and do it better right then. Just make a note that you can probably do this better, because you might have done it better later on in the story.
Right. That makes sense.
Anything to add, Kat?
No, I mean, I think just going back to like first pages, I think the only danger, having written things myself in the past with revising from the beginning, is that you never really make it past that first or second chapter because you're so obsessed with getting the first and second chapter right. And the truth is that that would be a really short book. So I would just say, you know, I like Holly's method a lot. My instinct is always to start at the beginning, but I do think it's a difficult way to start because I think you can get that first and second chapter really, really great. And then by the time you get to the third chapter, you run out of steam. And if every night you're sort of like tempted to start back on chapter 1, like you'll just never make it through. So I think sometimes having a more structured approach is great.
The other problem with starting at chapter 1 is that it's very important to have a chapter 1 that like grabs people's attention. One of the things that I do a lot is we actually need to start on chapter 4. And if you spent all of this time making chapter 1 perfect, that's going to hurt really hard, like a lot.
You just described the negative aspects of most of my revising life. We have a writer, I'm forgetting the exact quote, but her husband, Jennifer Albin, who's a best-selling NaNoWriMo author, and her husband used to joke that her obituary would read that she had written the most perfect, many perfect chapters, or the most perfect chapters, first chapters in the world.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel about when I take that approach, and it's exactly what you say. It's like the first 2 or 3 chapters might be really good, but then the novel will continually get worse after that, you know?
Yeah.
Because I'm putting so much less energy into it. So I love what you're saying. I'm curious, how many drafts would you say an author should expect to write?
Oh boy, I think that really depends.
Every book's different, but
yeah, I mean, I think part of it is we don't know how many drafts come to us. Sometimes we have books that have submitted to Swoon that people wrote in a couple weeks, or wrote over NaNoWriMo, wrote it in a month. People spent years on them. They've been working on it for years. So you don't know how many drafts it takes before. I would say at the minimum when I edit is probably like, if it's very clean, maybe 3 drafts all the way upwards to, you know, numbers you can't count. No, I'm just kidding. You can count them. You know, to way more than that. There's usually one big picture sort of edit, another sort of bigger picture, and then a line edit, I would say at the minimum. But it really depends what that book needs. And a lot of it depends on how the author likes to work. So if the author is somebody who's going to check in a lot, ask questions, get on the phone, work through problems, you might have fewer sort of physical drafts than somebody who sort of needs to get things out there, would rather work, like kind of have conversations through the manuscripts. But I love when there's been a lot of drafts and at the end you have that sort of monster Word doc where track changes is like, I will kill you, there's too many versions, and you see all the back and forth, you know, that you've had. It's kind of cool. It's like, this is the whole history of the book, and the work really shows in the end.
Mm-hmm. I like the running conversations and the track changes.
Yeah.
I've had lots of fun ones like that.
Yeah, so I would say
these like running conversations.
I would say it really depends, and I think like with anything, don't like match yourself up against other people. Like if you got it done with an editor in like 4 drafts and your friend's on your 25th draft, doesn't mean that one of you is doing something wrong. This process is very different for each person going through it. So I would say don't put pressure on yourself that you need to have a lot of drafts or that you need to have very few drafts. It's just going to be different for everybody.
It also depends on every book. I've had like the same author who, for one book, 3 drafts. It was great. It came in, like the first one came in, there were notes, it came back, we did a line edit, and it went into copy editing. The next book, 8 drafts, I think,
Yeah,
that I saw. I don't know how many times she reworked it before it came back to me, but 8 that I saw before we made it work.
Yeah.
Before everything clicked.
One of my favorite, reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Karen Russell, who said that 90% of her rough draft doesn't make it into the final draft. So only about 10% of her rough draft makes it all that way, which I think is really important to keep in mind, because sometimes I think as authors we can cling to our words and be very attached to them and think about all the work, those 7 cups of coffee at midnight, you know, we paid such a price for them, we want to keep them. And this kind of leads into my next question, which is there's, you know, this famous writing dictum from William Faulkner, I believe, who advised writers to kill their darlings. And I'm curious how you guys interpret that and how you would identify the darlings that need to be killed. And it sounds pretty horrific, actually. But
yeah, I know. We don't condone murder.
With
you have to kill something.
Kill their darlings.
Yeah.
I've always had really mixed feelings about that one. I don't know how useful it is for someone revising on their own. I think it's maybe something that might be more helpful for you to keep in mind when you're working with someone else. When you have an editor or a beta reader, or you're taking constructive criticism, you might keep that in the back of your mind as, you know, something's there. But at the same time, some passages will be your darlings because they accomplish exactly what they are supposed to accomplish and fit perfectly into the story, and you don't want to touch them. So just because you love something doesn't instinctively make it bad, right? And then some things will be stuff that you've worked really, really hard on and you love it a lot, but it doesn't quite work right here, right? But if it's important to your vision of the book, if you have an editor, your editor can work with you to find a place where you can put that darling, right? Like maybe it doesn't work right here where you have it, but maybe you can take half of your darling and move it to an earlier scene where it will fit. Or if you really, really, really need that darling to be, because it's part of your vision of the book, then maybe we have to rework 7 chapters to make it work. Yeah, that's a doable thing. It depends on how dear is that darling to you.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where, like Holly said, if you're doing it on your own, I think it's hard. I think this is one of those areas where getting another perspective is great. And that's actually one thing that we see a lot in the Swoon comments, is that people will say, you know, this character didn't work for me, or this section didn't work for me. And what's so cool about it is that it's not only, you know, a platform on which to get published, but it's also a platform on which to have beta readers from around the world who can tell you in a more objective sense than maybe your friends and family or your husband or your dog walker that you might shove your manuscript at, you know, here's what's working and here's what doesn't. So I think it's just important to have an outside read on it. And it's important to have more than one set of eyes of somebody who can sort of say what's not working and why, without just cutting things.
I love those comments too, because I find them super helpful for me, because if a reader cares enough about the manuscript to leave a long, detailed, chatty comment saying, I loved this character and I loved this one, but this one bothered me and here's why, that means something, right? It means that they cared enough about this story to respond to it, to think about it, and to really like put effort into it. And so that's something that I, as an editor, will be like, oh, let's see what it is about this story that made them care this much.
Yeah,
right?
I feel the same way, because I think for all of us, when we talk about the stuff we're loving on Swoon, we talk about the stuff that when we start it and we immediately start writing an editorial letter or writing notes, like that's what we mean. It doesn't have to be perfect. We always have notes, we always have edits, but the stuff that makes us sort of pull out our pen and paper and start writing notes on is the stuff that we end up acquiring for Swoon Reads, because it means that we have a vision in the same way in the comments. You know, it takes a lot of time to leave those comments. So the person clearly thinks the story is workable versus starting something and just not connecting with it. You're not going to take that time to write those notes.
Yeah, and it's not just in Swoon Reads. It's like even the ones I get from agents. It's like when I finish it, if I am like, this was so awesome, except for this one thing that just really girt, and like that sense of like fangirl rage that you get when something is so close to being exactly what it needs to be and isn't quite there yet. I'm like, okay, well, there's something, right? Like that's a feeling I've learned to pay attention to, because it means that I'm caring about this book.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what I look for in any book I read, from an agent, from anything, is that sense of, this is amazing and it would be so much better if you just did this.
Yeah.
That's great. So your readers in the Swoon community are sort of like fellow editors.
Definitely. Yeah, we really rely on them to sort of, put us on the stuff that they love and indicate that stuff to us and to help us with our edits too.
Yeah. Well, you know what? On that note, I'm going to, speaking of community, I'm going to invite people who are watching this to post their questions in chat, and for Catherine to send their questions up to me.
Ooh, it's exciting. What are we going to get? What are the questions going to be about?
We will find out. While Catherine's looking through the chat questions and stuff, let me go to one of my other questions. What is your favorite writing or editing advice?
Oh, that's on the other side of my paper.
Oh yeah, no, I've read that.
Holly, you kick us off.
All right. So we actually covered it earlier a little bit. My favorite piece of advice to give people is finish it. I can't fix it if it's not finished. That's generally my number one thing. The second piece of advice, which is more for publishing, is just keep writing. Write, revise, submit, write something else. Because if this book doesn't work, maybe the next one will.
Yeah, I think all of that's true. I think of it a lot in terms of the community too, and I think about this in every part of my life, but especially with writing. Like, make connections with people in the community at all sorts of stages. So make connections with published authors, pre-published authors, bookstore owners, librarians, editors. Like, meet people in the world that you want to be in or that you're in. Be really nice to them, be respectful, and then keep those connections. Like, I love when I meet people at a conference and they email me later to say, hey, I'm writing a picture book. I know you don't really work on picture books, but I just wanted to say it was great to meet you. Or, when I meet people at a bookstore and they follow up. So I think it's a really small world. And even if your whole community is online through the Nano community, keep in touch with those people and be there as a support for them. Because just like in publishing, people always told me, like, the people that are assistants with you now will be your peers later. And of course it's true. And it's the same in the writing community. There's sort of classes of writers that move up together through it. And so the people that are in your sort of Nano community are going to be the people who are sort of published alongside you. So keep connections with those people and be there for them and let them be there for you. Because I think you don't really have to go it alone, even though it can feel fairly solitary.
I think sometimes I think writers sometimes mythologize the solitude of writing, or the solitary aspects of writing, and I have certainly found that your community is just so important, both for the writing process but also afterwards.
Totally.
I should keep like some Excel spreadsheet of every wonderful thing that's happened because of a fellow writer. Like, just doors have been opened, or they've encouraged me in dark periods, or just what you're saying when you're the keep writing part. I mean, that is the key. If you do want to get published, is just keep putting your stuff out there, keep believing in yourself, and even if you get a rejection, I mean, there are all those stories, right? Like J.K. Rowling, I think she was rejected by 30 agents or something like that. So right. Yeah. I think every author has those stories. It's just kind of a rite of passage. So
definitely. And even on our site, I mean, we have authors who the book that we selected ended up being like their third book that they have on the Swoon Reads site. That we read their first book and loved it, but it wasn't quite right. We read the second book and loved it, but it wasn't quite right. And the book they got published was book number 3. So we see that all the time. So we always tell people, even if you weren't selected for this season, submit another manuscript, because we look for those repeat names and we love people who keep coming back and are engaged with our community. Yeah. So it can feel very much like you have one shot and that's it, but it really doesn't work that way. Publishing is is small, but it's also inclusive, and it wants people to succeed, and so does the writing community.
Yeah, we have what we call the Swoon Squad, where we have all of our authors are just kind of like part of the Swoon Squad, and they support each other, and it's really amazing to see that kind of community and how it works with our larger Swoon Reads community and all of the support that they get and all of the different the advice and stuff, because you were saying earlier about the comments and all of that stuff, and then we put up writing advice on our blog, and just anytime that we see that an author has taken the time to like revise their manuscript, we will be like, oh, they're putting in the effort. Let's go look at this and see what has happened.
Did we get any questions? Is anyone watching us, and do they have lots of questions?
They are. I'm just like, I'm going to ask Catherine to send up some here
Awesome.
in the chat room here. I'll ask you, though, I think the other question, you talked about your favorite writing or editing advice. What is your least favorite writing or editing advice? What do you just...
Kick it off?
Go for it.
I'm going to say write what you know, but then I'll qualify it, which is I think writing what you know in terms of like life experiences and emotional truths, like emotions that you've experienced and things that you've gone through is great. I think when people try to exactly recreate stuff that's happened in their life, sort of like event for event, sometimes that your life doesn't work in a specific plot arc. So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. So I think, write what you know in terms of emotion, but feel free to sort of take those emotions and apply them to a sci-fi world or a fantasy world or horror. Like, don't feel like you have to exactly recreate what's happened to you, because I think it can be sort of limiting.
I agree. I think write what you know. It requires, it's almost like a Zen koan,
Yeah. Yeah.
It requires a lot of thought. And just like you say, I mean, write what you know doesn't mean that you have to shut off a lot of other worlds and only write, for me, I grew up in a small town in Iowa. So I know that town, but my fiction shouldn't be constrained by the city limits,
Well, it's hard, I think, sometimes to get distance from that stuff when you're writing fiction or nonfiction, and it's so close to it feels hard, I think, to create and imagine outside of that, because you're like, well, that's not where the diner was. Like, it was on Main Street, not on Elm Street, so I want to have it be perfect. So if you don't have that distance, I think it can be really hard to write. I think it can be really hard to revise something that's based really closely on your own life, but also fictionalized.
I could see that. My personal thing is I really worry about having these hard and fast rules. Like, it's not any one particular one, but it's the idea of a hard and fast rule that must be followed, or some kind of like format that if you don't have this scene, then this scene, then this scene, like any of those things that are constraining your story. Because for every writing rule, I can probably find some other book that is an exception and that works amazingly well because they broke that rule, or the fact that they broke that rule doesn't do that. I mean, everything from like the grammar Nazis up to whatever, because up to even the rules that I myself say about you have to have a character doing action in chapter 1. I strongly believe that that's the way to go, but I can also find you a book that I love that has beautiful, wonderful lyrical description on page 1. I think I know the rules are there for a reason, but I think authors should approach them as guidelines, right? Not laws. Guidelines, not laws. So if you are getting to a place in a story where you have to break what you have considered a rule, then do it. Try it. It might work, and if not, we can fix it later. The most important thing is to get the story out of your head and onto a screen or a piece of paper or something so that someone else can look at it.
Yeah.
I think that's great, because I mean, you're right. Every rule, you can find a novel that breaks that rule.
Totally.
Or maybe novels, plural, rather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think breaking rules carries maybe a little bit of risk, but that's not to say you shouldn't do it, because I think the novels that stand out the most are sometimes the ones that do break those rules.
Yeah, yeah. I think you don't want to go breaking the rules willy-nilly just to break them. But if you're telling a story and you feel like the way that it needs to be told requires you to break a rule, then do it.
Yeah.
And then if it doesn't work, someone will tell you and you can look at it again in a later draft.
Yeah. What is the most common question you get? I bet you get asked this a lot when you meet people and tell them you're an editor. What's the most common question you get about how to get published?
How to get published?
The most common one I get is, will you read my manuscript?
Okay.
But
I think it's a lot of times about steps. Like, I think, like, how does it work? Like, do I have to get an agent? That's something we get even on Swoon. We take agented and unagented manuscripts, so you can have an agent. If you don't have an agent, that's also fine. I think people don't know how to sort of get it in the hands of editors, which is another thing we love about Swoon, which is like once you put it on the site, like someone at Macmillan will be looking at it, readers will be looking at it. So I think there's a real sort of mystery and intrigue to like how you'll get someone from publishing like to actually have their eyes on it. So I think that's one thing that people don't often understand is like you were saying about the gate that you have to go through. Like people are sort of like, how do I get that key, and how do I get someone to actually read it? And that's one thing we really love about our site is that you can get someone to read it just by uploading it.
Yeah, it's very much that. And it's also, the other thing I get is something we talked about at the beginning, which is sort of they don't understand what it is I do, or like
yeah, we joke that our friends at home think that we're copy editors, and people will say like, don't judge my grammar, and we're like, that's not my actual job, but love you anyway.
Yeah, or they won't understand that I work on YA. I work on children's and YA books, right? And so their adult nonfiction might be a fantastic book, but it's not going to be something I can help them get published.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of it, for me, my advice based off these questions that we get that aren't quite the right questions. I'm more than happy to tell them about publishing, but they're not asking me the right questions.
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of like I know publishing is confusing, but maybe try to like do your research and know your genre and know what you're writing so that you know what questions to ask. Because most people who work in publishing are happy to answer your questions. We understand it's confusing.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to ask the right questions to get the right answer.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, I'm just going to ask Catherine if she could. I somehow, and my Google chat isn't working. The magic has failed there.
Oh, no.
Ask her if she can put it in the group chat for any questions that are out there in our group chat window. And if people are too shy to ask questions, that's fine. We'll just keep talking.
We also have someone hiding in here who's monitoring the chat, so we can find out if we have any questions from there.
Yeah. Cool.
Should we tell you one from the chat?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So what are the most frequent mistakes that we see in first pages, or just in general? In general, what are the most frequent mistakes we see? Oh boy. Well, here's one that we see a lot on the site and in general: too many points of view. Without real intention behind it. And I think that goes to your comment about rules, Holly. Like if you have a real intention of why you're doing a certain thing that might be a rule, and you know why, then you have a good answer for it. But I often see a lot of points of view that are not very distinguishable from each other, and it's not needed for the story. I think I have a sense that it's more fun to write, again, having dabbled in writing myself, that it's more fun to write multiple points of view. But I will say that's something we see a lot that we end up changing in revision. What about for you? Frequent mistakes or missteps for people?
For me, there'll be a lot of, there's a thing that I call agency, where a character has agency if they change the plot, right? Mm-hmm. If their decisions matter, they have agency and they change the plot. And there's so many books that I get that have these great, like, complicated plots or whatever, but your main character, nothing they does matters, right? They don't have any agency. So it's a lot of people focus on the plot and they forget that your character has to drive your plot.
That's a good point. I say that a lot in my edit notes, like your character is a passenger and they need to be the driver. Like they're kind of just, plot is happening to them and not because of them.
Yeah.
That's true. That happens a lot, I would say.
It doesn't matter how cool your plot is if there's no stakes attached to it, and stakes come because you care about the character.
Yeah.
You care about what happens to this person. And I've made an emotional connection to your character, so I want to care and I want to feel like the choices they make good or bad, especially bad, are going to mess with the story.
Yeah. All right. Do you have more from your end, or should we
have the questions now?
Yeah.
So,
all right. Awesome.
I don't know what happened, but now we have a huge queue of questions.
Okay, we'll go really fast.
This first, yeah, and if Eleanor wants to chime in with questions, that's fine too.
That's fine. We'll do speed round. This will be fun.
Claire Chamberlain asks, if you lose writing momentum, or I guess editing momentum, how do you get started again? I bet you hear this from your writers you work with, that sometimes they get to that moment of frustration. Actually, there was just an article in LitHub yesterday that was listed all the authors who hate their novels even after publication. You know,
wow.
Frustrating process.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you help authors go through, get through that obstacle?
I mean, I will say what Holly said before is a good key, which is just giving yourself more structure, like giving yourself real homework of what to do next. We have a blog post that I love that I think you wrote, Holly, about emotional mapping, where it goes through each scene and lets you track, like, sort of if your character, what they're feeling at the beginning, what they're feeling at the end. So that's something we recommend to a lot of people, I would say, who are stuck, is sort of, why don't you figure out what's going on with your character's emotions throughout the book? That's something that I point to all the time on our blog. I think giving yourself like a really structured way forward, and not just that sort of like, I'm just going to go in and revise random things. I think that's actually the way to go. And in terms of editing, losing editing momentum is not just going over the same parts over and over, but doing very specific sort of looks at like different passes. And I think we actually just had a post on this. I brought a prop from our author Claire Can, who just published Let's Talk About Love this week. She just did a really interesting post about after you kill your darlings and sort of how to structure a book. She talks about like the skin draft, the muscle draft, like going through, like you do one pass for character, one pass for emotions, one pass for plot. So I think sort of giving yourself specific goals when you're editing is a good way to not just sort of stab at it randomly.
Also, if you find yourself slamming against a wall, right? Like you've hit a block, you can't, you're stuck, you're like, you've been like poking at this and poking at this and poking at this, and you can't make it work. I'm a huge fan of communication and talking things out, because my brain, sometimes I don't know what I'm thinking until I said it out loud. So find someone who will let you babble at them until you have talked your way around the problem. Right? So like, it's my job as an editor. I tell my authors, if you get stuck, call me and we'll unstick you.
You're the best. That is so generous.
Yeah.
I mean, I like brainstorming anyway. My brother is also a writer, and he will sometimes call me and we play wall, where he flings ideas at me just to watch my face react so he can tell which ones work.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know a lot of writers do. I mean, some writers are, I tend to be that writer who doesn't like to talk until whatever, the fifth draft, but
right.
I sometimes envy those who talk out their stories from the very beginning.
Or read it out loud.
What's that?
Or a simple way, if you don't want to talk to somebody else, if you're not ready to share it with anyone, read it out loud. Maybe even record it. Read it out loud. Listen to yourself reading it. When you say something out loud, it sounds different, and it goes through a different part of your brain.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great revision tip. I love reading things out loud, because you can, just like you said, but you can also like be more tuned to the rhythm of the sentences too.
Totally.
Especially in the final draft. This comes from Nicole W. And she says, how do you decide what feedback to incorporate in your revisions after the beta reader process? And I think she's getting to that tough writer moment where you've heard a variety of voices, and sometimes they say different things. And I wonder if you even experienced this on the Swoon site, where you're getting different sort of reader feedback, and you have to decide what is the most accurate, what serves the story the best.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of look at the why behind the feedback, and like, what is the heart of the feedback? So if you're getting a lot of feedback that one character is unlikable, for example, I would sort of dig into, like, when your own revision, like, what about them is making people feel that way, and sort of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and, you know, cutting that character completely, but saying, okay, it's this one scene where I have my character, you know, like kick a puppy or something. Like, oh, I could just take out the puppy kicking scene and my character would not be unlikable anymore. I don't have to scrap the whole character. So I think a lot of it is just synthesizing their feedback through sort of figuring out their motivation. Like why do they, if they're saying like, I don't like chapter one, I don't like chapter one, I don't like chapter one, trying to sort of get feedback of why, and then sort of figuring out if it makes sense for your process. Because in the end, you have to stand behind the revisions you make. And I do think at some point that I think there is such a thing as sort of too much feedback on the same thing over and over. And at some point you as the writer have to really decide what makes sense for your book.
The other thing is if you have contradictory feedback, like one beta reader says, I love this thing so much, and the other beta reader is, I hate this thing so much, and they both seem to have the same amount of passion, which I find comes sometimes, even in our own discussions, because everybody comes at a book from different things. Mm-hmm. Like I'll be talking with Kat and I tend to have absolutely opposite interests. So if we both love something, there's something really, really there. But when we're talking about things, like people connect to different things, people have different reactions to different things. So when you get this feedback that is contradictory, what you need to do is figure out what is the heart of your story. What story are you trying to tell? And then look at that, and that's the feedback that matches that. The feedback that furthers the heart of your story is the feedback you should listen to. That said, if somebody absolutely hates something, do try to find out why, because you might be able to do a tiny tweak that makes them go from absolutely hating it to being like, okay, that's fine. And then they can continue to love the thing that they love without being, distracted by this one tiny little thing. Like it can be tiny things can have the biggest change, but if you have that kind of contradictory feedback, it's knowing the story. What is the heart of your story? What do you want? Like, what is your main character, and what lesson are they learning? Not really what lesson are they learning, but what is their journey, and which set of feedback helps you tell that journey the best?
Yeah. That's really great, because I think when you're getting feedback, it's so easy to get lost in the voices, whether they're contradictory or not. And sometimes somebody else's feedback can actually lead you away from your story.
Totally.
It can be hard to remember, how to go back to that, or remember what the core of it or the heart of it is. That's really great. This next question I'm really interested about it comes from Cleo the Harpy. He says, I like to think I'm a good editor. I edit stories for my friends. He says, how do I get better? And so I think this is like this interesting thing as a writer. The more we write and the more we engage with our friends or other authors' material, I think we all become better editors. But do you have any, I don't know, some kind of training ground or some advice about how a writer actually hones their editorial skills?
Yeah, I would say a really basic thing is that I try to do is use examples. Instead of saying like your character is mean or your plot is slow, like actually using specific examples and saying like in chapter 2, the character is passive for the most of the chapter, so it felt slow to me. Or, when your character said this specific thing, it felt mean. So I think it's very hard for anyone to get feedback in any aspect of life without something specific. I think people need specificity to sort of know what you're talking about to illustrate the story. So I would say a good way to start is to take good notes and have specific sort of evidence or feedback when you give feedback.
The other thing too that I like to do is try to explain why something isn't working to you, right? Like not just say this, like it's giving specific reasons why it's there, but also maybe a lot of times, like I send out really, really long edit letters and I kind of apologize to my authors for it. But a lot of the reason why is because I will explain what I was reading, like what I took from this and then why it doesn't work. And here's a way that you might fix it. Right? And so that takes a lot of space, but it also means that even if my proposed solution isn't the right one, at least they know where I was coming from. Yeah, like because I'm only human and I'm only reacting to what's on the page. So if you actually meant to say this other thing, and it's very important that this character does this other thing and I get it wrong, if I say, this is how I understood this character, this is how this character worked for me, this is my understanding of him, and I got it wrong, then you as an author can be like, how did you get there? Okay, let me look. Oh, I did not actually say this thing that I had in my head and put it on the page.
I also say too, to be like a good editor for your friends, and also I think important to be a writer, is just basic read in the genre. Like if you're going to be in a critique group where you're critiquing YA, picture book, and middle grade, you should be reading at least some YA picture book and middle grade, to sort of have a basis for your feedback. I think that's really important and something people talk about a lot. Like, YA editors should also be YA readers. Like, you need to have a sense of what else is out there to know sort of what it compares to. So in a critique group, like, you should have at least a little bit of experience in the genres you're talking about so you can be a more educated editor.
Yeah, the very first thing we ask any intern who wants to come in to work in publishing as an editorial intern, it's not so much about what experience they have. It's the first question is, okay, so what books do you read? Let's have a conversation about the last 5 YA books you read.
Yeah.
And they better be able to tell me 5 YA books off the top of their head that they liked or at least read recently. Otherwise, they probably aren't the right person for this job.
On that note, did we ever define exactly what the Swoon Reads genres, what genres you publish?
We published YA.
All YA.
Yeah. I know you started out with, it was YA romance, right?
Yeah. We've been for about over a year, maybe a year and 4 months, we've been doing all YA, all genres. So we are definitely hungry for your mystery, thriller, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, historical, everything. As long as it's young adult, we want to read it.
Yeah.
Right.
We started with YA romance, and then so many of the submissions on the site were coming in and they didn't have the romance aspect, but they were still so great, and we're like, we really needed to expand into things like sci-fi and fantasy and mystery and horror, because there's just
so much good stuff.
So much good stuff out there. Yeah.
Corteg asks, can I use my own artists for my book cover, or am I stuck with whatever, artists?
Ooh, covers. we want to talk about covers. That's actually one of our favorite parts of the Swoon Reads process.
Oh,
we actually do cover voting, where we put up 3 to 5 covers on our site for most of our books, and the community gets to vote on what cover they want, what cover direction, which is really, really fun. I will say, to answer that, it's, except for in a picture book where you're using the illustrator, I would say it's extremely rare that people find they come with their own artist. I can't think of a time that it's happened, because
I can.
Oh, you think you can? All right. Well, it's extreme. I would say
it's very rare.
It's extremely rare.
But it has happened a couple of times. The thing that you do is, if you can't guarantee that you'll use your own artist. If you're putting your YA manuscript up on Swoon Reads, you need a cover. You can totally use it on Swoon Reads.
Definitely.
And have your artist. And we will, if we love that artwork, we've often included that, like an option or direction that's based off the original cover in our voting process. We've done that before. But if you're submitting like through traditional publishing or whatever, you can send that cover art and recommend that artist and be like, I love this artist, and if possible, we want you to be happy, so we will look at them and we'll share them with our design team. But it's not just like, I as an editor, I don't get to be like, this is the cover of the book. No editor gets to be like, this is the cover of the book. There is a wonderful, talented team of designers who go through that. And then that goes to another wonderful, talented team of marketing and sales people who sit there and give lots of feedback, and it changes 15 times. And then we finally get something that everyone is happy with, and then we take it to Barnes and Noble and they go, yeah, we don't like that, and we have to do it again.
not every time.
Not every time. But like, these are the kinds of things it is. No one has sole control over the cover.
Yeah.
It's very much a group effort. So much of publishing is a group effort. The author controls the manuscript that is given to the editor, and then we work together to make it as best as possible. But once we hand it off to somebody else, then it becomes a group effort. Everybody pitches in. You have copy editors, you have designers, you have marketing people. Like, there's an entire building full of people who are working to make your book better.
Yeah. We're at our time here. I thought it'd be great to conclude the webcast with just some parting advice or encouragement from each of you in terms of helping people reach that finish line that you said you've got to finish it, right?
Oh boy, this is time for like deep thoughts with Kat and Holly. Oh, no pressure. I mean, I would say just focus on writing the best book that you can write, even though that can sound sort of corny. Have it be a book that you love. When you're done and you're ready to submit it to Swoon or to find an agent or whatever you're going to do, make it a book that you're proud of and that you can stand behind. I think that's the most important thing. It needs to be a book that you love. And, you know, I'm going back to structure, like carve out that time for yourself to do it. Like there are people in this building who write, you know, in addition to their full-time jobs, and they say like, you know, I can't do anything after work. 7 to 9 is my writing time, or 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is my writing time. Like give yourself the space to devote yourself to your art. I think it's important for all people. I think it's a conversation that's happening now, particularly around women. It's just sort of like carving out that time and saying like, I'm going to give myself this time for my art. And that's the time that I'm going to get. So I think it's just important to give that time to yourself to really do what you want to accomplish.
I think it is. It's just like you said, for me, it's always about creating something that you love and that other people can love, right? Like if you love it, if you've put your heart and soul into it, even if it was hard and there were times when you absolutely hated it, if you have passion, and that passion will show through, right? And if you want to write, then write, you know? Like,
yeah. Don't let people tell you no.
And don't worry that you're wasting your time writing because this page happens to be bad.
That's a really good point.
You will learn something from everything that you write. So if this page doesn't work, if this draft doesn't work, something in it you'll learn something from every page that you write.
That's a great point. I said that to an author who we've gone through a lot of rounds of revision. Like these revisions, and even if we cut like half the book and start over, it was not wasted time, because you're always learning how to be a better writer, even if you're like, you know, using 10% of it later. It's all part of the experience of making the book. So I think that's a great way to leave it. It's not wasted. If you're writing, you're not wasting time.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. You know, they say it takes 10,000 hours to reach mastery in anything. That's kind of a popular saying these days. And I remember a story, Ray Bradbury, I think when he first started out, he said he tried to write a story a week.
Wow.
But with the premise that he just had to write hundreds or maybe even thousands of stories before he was going to get it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that just like keep putting the pen on the page. You know, it takes a lot of practice to really write something that's really good. And also both of you touched on this, and I'm really glad you did. Is that, you know, to really preserve like your story and to tell your story and to be proud of your story, because I think sometimes I think people try to write bestsellers, and as far as I know, no one can predict what novel is going to become a bestseller, really.
Alas, no. If you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah.
But
if you figure it out, you can come have both of our jobs. We're going to quit.
Exactly.
And let you replace us.
So why not just write your story, the story you're going to love? And I've found that like if you're proud of your story and if you keep its purity, you're going to be better at like putting it out there and promoting it, and you're going to feel proud if you go to a reading and when you read from it. You know, it's all very empowering to really hone in on your story and to honor that.
And remember when you're tempted to write the big thing and write to trends, remember anything that you're reading now was written 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and with pop culture, things switch so quickly. Mm-hmm. It's like impossible to get, by the time, even at the fastest, most rushed schedule, by the time your book comes out, you'll have missed the high point of the trend.
Yeah, so you should just write something.
So it's very important to just make sure that you love your book, and don't worry about what the trend is, what's selling right now, because if your book isn't selling right now, it might be selling in 5 years.
Yeah.
If you're proud of it, you'll still have it, and you can submit it then.
Well, that's a great note to end on, and thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much to Swoon Reads for the NaNoWriMo sponsorship year over year, and I hope that you're receiving a lot of. I know you have published NaNoWriMo novels.
Definitely.
Oh yeah.
I encourage people writing YA to submit their novels to Swoon Reads, and Kat and Holly, you might find yourself working with them.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, we love debut novels. I love it so much. Working with brand new authors is one of my favorite things.
Great. Well, I'm going to remind people to go to our Now What page, our I Wrote a Novel Now What page on the NaNoWriMo site. Take the revision promise. You'll be entered in to win 1 of 5 copies of my book, Pep Talks, which will hopefully keep you inspired for a year of writing. Also, check out our goal trackers. You can set revision goals and writing goals. We're all about helping you not only draft your novel during NaNoWriMo, but finishing it and working on it the rest of the year. And Swoon Reads is part of that. So thank you so much, Kat and Holly. Especially staying up late in New York City or being in your office late. Yeah.
We're just gonna sleep here. We don't actually have homes. We just live in our office. No big deal. Kidding, Macmillan people who manage this office. We have homes. We don't sleep here.
Well, go enjoy a good dinner, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and keep tuning in and keep writing.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.